Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Hey, Kate.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. Today is April 24th, 2018, and I would like to
Yes.
welcome you back, Kate, to Shattered
Yeah, well,
Reality.
thank you.
You've been
Yes,
out
it's
for a
been
couple of weeks, and
yes, I have.
and we're so happy to have you back here on the show. It's not the same without you, believe me. So
Well,
spring
thank
is
you.
springing here in the Northeast, and we have a really wonderful show today. We have a very, very interesting gentleman coming on the show. He has written a book called Incident at Devil's Den. He is a lawyer and he is a former assistant attorney general. He has served in the Air Force just post Vietnam. He got into the Air Force as Vietnam was winding down. He's a married man with two children and two grandchildren. He's an all-around regular guy, the kind of guy that you would definitely think would be telling an honest, truthful story. And what I'm going to suggest to you here, Kate, is that as we introduce our guest, after we say hello to him, I think in this particular case, we're just unlike our usual chatty, bratty selves. We are just going to let him tell his story at the beginning, and then we'll ask him questions later on. So we're going to kind of sit back, which is not generally what we do, if that's okay with you, Kate.
I think that's a great idea. Fascinating story. Wow.
It is an
Wow.
amazing,
Yeah.
amazing story.
But
So,
what amazes me more is that how when someone sees something like this and reports it, the next thing they have to do is say, "Oh, what, how," just go over their entire background, make them a credible witness, as if someone's going to report something like this otherwise. It always has annoyed me that they had to go overboard to prove that they're a credible witness, which, Terry, you certainly are. I mean, without saying, but it's just annoying
Yes.
to find that you had to do that. And as you mentioned, too, in your book, that, you were certainly nervous about doing this while you were working in a field where this would be scoffed at. You'd hear the snickers behind your back.
Oh, sure.
And,
Kate,
yeah, I know.
Kate, can I stop you for 1 second because we haven't
Certainly.
said his full name? This is
Oh.
Terry Lovelace. Hi, Terry. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you had introduced Mr. Lovelace. I beg your
Welcome. I gave everything out but his name, so I'm sorry to interrupt you. And but this is Terry Lovelace, and he is right now he's in Texas, and he has written this Incident at Devil's Den, which is a fabulous book. And
Yes, it is.
so we'd like to hear your story, Terry, if you'd like to tell us in the order in which it happened or in whatever order. We'll just kind of let you run a little bit with this, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I won't go in chronological order because I think it'll make more sense. Well, I'll just explain.
Mm-hmm.
I separated from the Air Force in 1979, and I began running. There was a jogging, as it was called, was something new, and I became a pretty avid runner. I mean, not a marathon guy, but I would run, try to run a couple miles a day. And I noticed that every single time I hit about the 2 mile mark in my run, there's a spot on my right leg just above my knee and to the right, about the size of a $50, that would go numb. And I referred to it as my numb spot. And I asked some other runners, you guys ever experienced anything like it? Nobody had ever heard of anything like it. I asked my doctor, what is this? Is anything to be worried about? He's absolutely not. Don't worry about it. If it's not bothering you, don't worry about it. So I didn't. But I was cognizant of it. And it was there for 40 years. In
Wow.
2012, I took a slight fall down some stairs, and I thought I'd broken my leg. And I went to the hospital emergency room to have my leg x-rayed, the VA hospital, I might mention. And radiology tech took the standard 2 shots of my leg and looked kind of perplexed and said, well, we're going to do 2 more. And she did 2 more. And then she asked me, she said, Mr. Lovelace, have you had a shrapnel wound or been in an automobile accident? Something to account for a piece of metal in your leg? And I said, no, absolutely not. And she took 2 more shots. There were a total of 8 shots taken.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked to see them because, I'm not a doctor or a radiologist, but I was an EMT when I was in the military for 6 years. So I'd seen x-rays before, and it's pretty clear to see on an x-ray something that doesn't belong, if that makes sense. When you see it and it just doesn't belong.
We're going to put it up on the website, by the way, the x-ray, just putting that in there.
Oh, good.
She put it up on the box and showed me, and she said, I've asked the radiologist to come down and give his opinion. Now, there were 2, actually. There are 2 anomalies. There is the metallic piece about the size of a fingernail above my knee that has 2 what looks like wires that go straight up.
Huh.
Then below my knee, there is a flower petal arrangement of material that the radiologist said is the same density as bone, but it couldn't be bone, shouldn't be bone. Those aren't cysts or nodules or nodes. Those are actually, from the side view, they look almost round, but from a head-on view, you can see that they're perfectly flat. They are flat disc.
So,
And
wow.
I asked the doctor.
And this was back in '79. Now, was that
No,
the
no.
year?
No,
Oh,
this
well,
is in
2012.
2012.
Oh,
This
but
is in
that was the
2012.
X-ray. But you started to run back in '79.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So that's probably it was. So those things were there before 2012. They've been there all along.
No doubt.
And '79 was way before like chips and all this sort of miniaturization of computer parts came along.
Yes.
Pretty much, yeah. Wow. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to get an idea when. Okay.
It's a good point to make clear. So the radiologist and the emergency room radiologist walked over to my leg and poked my leg with his finger and said, "It'll be right here." And I said, "What, doctor? What will be right here?" He said, "The scar." He said, something has breached the integrity of your skin for this item to be embedded in your leg, and there must be a scar." He says, "Have you been in an accident?" No, denied ever being hurt. And he frowned and asked me to take my pants off and look. And he looked at my leg for 20 minutes. Then he sent his intern. And I might add, medical people kept trickling into the room, looking at the X-ray and whispering and mumbling. And, the intern returned with a handheld black light. And the radiologist said that this will make the scar tissue fluoresce. Killed the overhead lights. And then he examined my leg again under the black light and could find no scar because there is no scar. And I asked him, I said, "Doctor, how often have you seen a foreign object in a human body without a corresponding scar?" And his reply was, "I've been doing this for 23 years and never." never's the answer.
Well, yeah, because you have to. I mean, you have to. Yeah, definitely, there has to be a scar. And if there isn't, that's really fairly amazing.
Point of entry.
Yeah.
He called it a portal of entry. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. So it didn't hit me until they gave me a pair of crutches. They diagnosed me as having a Baker's cyst. Nothing to do with baking. It's just a cyst that causes pain. It lasts for a couple of weeks and then it's gone, and it's a benign thing.
Mm-hmm.
But on my way to the car with my wife, it hit me. This is that same spot. This is that same spot that goes numb. It's right over this thing. And my wife and I kind of looked at one another, and we had some experiences with UFOs and the like. And it had become, after 1977, it had become in our household kind of a non-topic. We didn't discuss it. We didn't watch movies about UFOs or Independence, like the movie Independence Day, which everyone's seen but me. Because every time I watch something of that genre, it triggers nightmares. So,
how about while you're watching it? Do you get like anxiety during the time?
Yes, I do sometimes. I do sometimes.
So it brings back bad memories then.
It does. There are some things that I call triggers, and I mentioned in my book, like mannequin heads.
Really?
1987, yes. 1987, my wife and I were walking around a mall. It was Christmas time, and we rounded a corner, and there was a shop window, and it was being set up, and there were about 3 or 4 mannequins that were nude, and a couple of them just from the waist up.
So
and
no wigs or anything on them yet?
No wigs,
hair.
no clothing, no hair.
Yeah.
I saw them, and I had a panic attack. I just couldn't. I had to leave. And I told my wife, I'm sorry, but we got to leave. And I didn't sleep well that night. I didn't sleep well for a couple of nights. That was and that was just an odd experience. It was a meltdown that really, there was no reason for it.
It's sort of starting to come together, though.
Yes.
I think I got an idea where this one's going to be headed. Wow. So I'm sorry. So I really, you tell a great story, and I really shouldn't keep interrupting you. Please go ahead.
No. Help you stay on track. My wife had asked me to go and see a therapist because of the nightmares that I'd had. We had an incident, a big incident in 1977 when I believe that myself and my buddy Tobias, when we were abducted. And we went through a lot of stress after that. And I'll explain that in just a bit. But we wanted nothing to do with the topic. We just had our fill of UFOs and anything of the like. So, we just, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this. The same mall, 2 weeks later, we walked around a corner, and there was a stand of hardcover books on the end cap of a big chain bookstore. And I don't remember if it was Whitley Strieber's book or Communion.
Yeah,
it was the book with the alien on the cover.
Yep.
Communion.
Yeah, it's Communion. Yeah.
I walked around the corner and I saw that face, and it just, bam! It just hit me.
Yeah.
And I grabbed my wife's shoulder, and I said, "I got to leave." And I walked out, and she ran after me and wanted to know what's wrong. And I said, "My God, did you see that? Go back and look at it." She did, and she came back to me and said, yeah, it's a kind of a spooky looking face, but so what? But just like the mannequin heads, the response was not appropriate to the stimuli. It was way over the top of what it should have been. She suggested I see a therapist, which I did.
Okay.
I did for a couple of sessions, and it was an odd experience. And then I chose a therapist that was close to my office. I was busy. I didn't want to devote a lot of time to doctor's appointments. And it was a woman named Beth. I'll call her Beth. I call her Beth in the book. And very nice woman, very good credentials, MSW with Master's in Social Work with a clinical emphasis. And she administered some tests. She administered an MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, and another test that I wasn't familiar with. And on the second session, we discussed them. And she says, Terry, there's some peculiar things. She said, well, first of all, you're not psychotic. You're not suffering from any mental illness. But she says, your test scores are very similar to those people who are suffering from PTSD.
Uh-huh.
And she asked, have you had a traumatic experience in your life? And I said, well, and I knew I didn't want to talk about the 1977 event because every time I spoke about
that,
yeah, and it felt like I could sense there was an audible change in her voice and the room felt smaller and I felt uncomfortable. And I said, Beth, I think I need to go and I'll reschedule with you. Well, I think we both know I wasn't coming back. And I shook her hand and ran to the car. And I called that chapter A Close Call. And that's the way it felt. It felt like I had a close call, but from what? I don't know. I think that these things, whatever they are, that come and take us, can program us.
Well, obviously you got something in you, Yeah. Well, your close call, too, is maybe you just really didn't want to face up to the fact that something had happened to you that you really didn't want to know about. Because sometimes knowing about it is like reliving it, and it's terribly scary. I mean,
yes.
Terribly. The initial event, I can't imagine the sheer terror. I really don't want to imagine it.
We know the sheer terror, Kate. We know the sheer terror.
Yes.
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 And it's everyone thinks that, oh, well, you're just afraid. It goes so far beyond that. I mean, It's like
this goes so far beyond fear.
It is beyond fear, and I don't use litmus tests with people, but I do know that anybody who has really had a one-on-one experience has this type of fear that is so it's not like being afraid of the dark or being afraid of butterflies or being afraid of spiders or something. This is earthy, gut-wrenching, animal, primitive brain fear. It comes somewhere, I think, from the lizard brain or a very old part of the brain that is absolutely debilitating. Forgive my rudeness, crap in your pants fear.
But you are spot on. You are so spot on. I used almost those exact same words in my book. I said, this is a primitive kind of fear that comes from deep in the brainstem. Yeah. And I said, I have no doubt that this fear must have been what our ancestors, maybe 10,000 generations ago, what they must have felt after the sun went down. And then we were the prey all of a sudden.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I had two experiences as a child, too, that I should mention, because I think that they help to bring this into focus and give it a little more context. and especially in regard to discussion of fear. When I was 8, I had recurrent nightmares, and in these nightmares were always the same. There were 4 monkeys, little monkeys. I'm 8 years old, and these 4 little monkeys are wearing masks. The masks are all white with yellow eyes and exaggerated smiles.
Oh, wow.
They're all identical, and they would appear in my room and approach my bed in a semicircle and get closer to me. And the one closest to my head would say, "Come with us, Terry. Come with us and we'll play and we'll bring you back. Come with us." And in my mind's eye to this day, I can see a monkey paw being held out to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can see a hand, 4 long fingers,
Wow.
not a human hand,
Wow.
reaching out to me. And
So, wow. That's so classic.
and I think I went with them. I think I even said in my book, when I first saw the monkeys, they were, and this was a recurring event. When I first see them, they're almost comical in a way, and I think they disguise. They take on a guise that to look benign, to look friendly, and I had a memory of being taken once and playing with other children. Now, 8 years old, 1963, I'm having these nightmares, and coincidentally or concurrently, at the same time I'm having these nightmares, I'm in my backyard, and I'm shooting a bow and arrow, and I'm loading an arrow into the notch of the bowstring, and I'm looking down, and I see this shadow. I see this big elliptical shadow move from in back of me forward. And instinctively, I looked up, expecting to see a cloud, and over the top of me, about 50 feet in the air, is this absolutely gorgeous, beautiful saucer.
Wow.
And I was awestruck by this thing. And I remember I stood there and I thought, I was just amazed. And I remember there was a odd audible change in that the neighborhood was normally alive with. This was in the middle of a Saturday afternoon in a neighborhood that's normally alive with children and cars, and I could hear my mother's soap operas or TV from blaring from the house, but it was gone. It was like silent.
The Oz effect. That's
ionized smell. There's a name for that.
The Oz effect. I believe it was coined by the British UFO investigator named Jenny Randalls.
Okay.
Boy, so you're a lifelong experiencer.
Was that smell just like right after a thunderstorm?
Yeah,
and I noticed the hair on my arms stood up.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, the lawn had just been mowed a day or two before, and I had a compulsion to lie down on my back and look up at this thing, 1963, staring up at this silver disc directly over my head. That was just an incredible thing to see. And after I had watched it for a moment, and again, I have no perception of time. I don't know if I watched it for 3 minutes or 30 minutes. It's odd. I don't know, but I watched it wobble in the breeze a bit, and then it listed kind of to one side, and then shot off, and it was gone literally in the blink of an eye. If you blinked, you would have missed it, but I saw it go, and I screamed at that point. I jumped to my feet, and I'm screaming, "Mom, Mom!" And of course, my poor mother thinks I've taken my bow and arrow and shot the neighbor or something, and she comes running out and looks me over and does a quick assessment and doesn't see any blood and drags me in the house. And she tells me, "You've got to stop screaming." I don't remember screaming. But she told me later that I did, that I screamed nonstop until we got in the house because my throat was sore, was hoarse from screaming.
Wow.
And I was staring at the spot. She told me, "You were staring at that spot in the sky." And she said, "I had to drag you in by the arm." So 1963, my mom says, what happened? What happened? I'm like, "Mom, did you see it? It was so cool. It was a flying saucer, just like the ones you've seen on TV." And she's like, whoa, wait a minute. Terry, I don't know what you saw, but you did not see a flying saucer. And I said, "Yes, I did. I know what I saw." She says, "No, you didn't. It was something else. I promise you. You can't go around and tell people you saw a UFO or a flying saucer. You can't go around telling people you're seeing flying saucers. They'll think you're crazy. They'll think there's something wrong with you or something wrong with us. Don't." She said it had to be a jet. It had to be something secret from the Army. But I was insistent, That's untrue. I know what I saw. Mom, you weren't there.
Yeah.
How much easier life would have been had she been there. But yeah, my folks wouldn't believe me. And that is when, from that point, is when the nightmares took a darker turn.
Oh, my.
And that's when I had the recall of what I call in the book the big bug-like things. And these things were about 6 feet tall. Of course, when I was 8, they looked probably 9 feet tall. And they look like big bugs. They look like praying mantises.
Yes, this is a well-known a variant of an alien. It's one of the types of aliens that people do apparently see.
Well, what amazed me was the hands, if you want to call them hands, were manipulating these stainless steel objects with dexterity. They were like, he was turning them around, and I was kind of fascinated by that. I was subdued. I think I was screaming. At one point, there were a couple of instances, and at one point I recall he was doing something to my lower spine.
Oh dear.
And I was screaming, and I think I annoyed him. And the only time he ever communicated with, I always pleaded with these things. "Why are you doing this? Leave me alone. Let me go back home. I'm scared." Didn't completely ignore my pleas. This time, for whatever reason, like I said, I think I got on its nerves. I got the message in my head, Why are you doing this? Why are you screaming like this? You've been here before. We're going to take you back home. Everything's going to be okay. You won't remember this. And this sounds odd, but I got a vibe from this thing like, "Hey, I'm just doing my job, man." If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's, I guess they sort of see us like we see tagging, birds in the sky, like to see the flight paths of birds.
Yes.
Scientists will tag them, and I think that's how they view us, like wild animals that they can do what the heck they want with.
Yes. I think I refer to myself as that. In 2012, it hit me that, these things, this thing in my leg had to get there some way. That means these things had to put their hands on me. And that's terror. That makes my skin crawl.
Absolutely.
At night, I think about that sometimes, and then I usually end up being awake all night because this was just a terrifying ordeal. But I learned pretty quickly that no one would believe me. And I mean, I was a very straight kid. I was a good student. I wasn't a liar. I didn't make up stories. I could not understand why adults would not listen to me. But they were adamant it was not a flying saucer. They went as far as to take me to a medical doctor, to the family doctor, have me checked over. And the doctor asked my dad to leave the room and asked me, he says, "Now, son, tell me what you saw." And I said, "Well, it was a jet. I think it was a jet." And he crosses his arms and he's like, "Well, no, why would jets give you nightmares about flying saucers?" And at that time, I wasn't having nightmares about flying saucers. I was having nightmares about these big bug things
Right.
hurting me. And he says, "You can trust me. I'm your doctor. I want you to be well." So against my better judgment, I told him the truth. I said, "I saw the silver disc in the sky. It was beautiful." I told him the whole story, and he never tipped his hand. He just kind of nodded, called my dad back in the room and said, "What we have here is an overactive imagination compounded by Johnny Quest cartoons.
Oh, dear.
And what kind of TV is he watching?" And they had a conversation like I wasn't even in the room, and they took me home. My folks' idea of healthier television was Three Stooges reruns.
Oh, my.
And that lasted about 3 weeks, and then that was on everyone's last nerve. But I learned from that you can't tell people because they won't believe you. And it just when I was 11, just a few years later, I had a second sighting, and this one was a lot more dramatic. And it was bitterly cold January night. I went to bed, normal, routine evening in every way, didn't watch anything spooky on TV. And I recall waking up, and when I opened my eyes, I was sitting bolt upright in my bed. And there was a low mechanical hum. I call it mechanical, like if you've ever been next to a diesel locomotive or some big piece of machinery.
A turbine, for instance?
Yeah. And it wasn't so much loud as it sounded powerful. And my room is lit up with yellow, white, and orange lights flashing. And they're, more brilliant than any sunrise. They are my room is lit up. And the hum the bed is vibrating. And I had a little desk next to my bed. I had these little model airplanes on the desk. And I saw one of them vibrated off the edge and fell onto the floor. Well, I got out of bed and I was interested, but the thought to cry out to my mom never crossed my mind. But I was almost apathetic. And I went and I was just curious, and I opened the blind, and here is a flying saucer. And it's the top side of the one that I saw before, or one like it.
A circular disc.
It's a circular disc with a dome on top, and the dome is where the lights are coming from. And the lights are so intense, I can't look into the dome. But I can see that underneath it, there is steam or some type of, looks like heavy fog. And I recall I took the drapery and I tucked it into the Venetian blind so I could look at it hands-free. And I looked at it for a minute, and then I thought, well, that's pretty cool, but I'm going to go back to bed. And I turned around and went back to bed. It was the oddest thing. It was as if I laid down, opened my eyes, and it was daytime.
Wow.
And if not an instant had passed. And I got out of bed and I almost stepped on this little airplane, and I thought, holy cow, I could have stepped on it. I could have broke that. And then my memory hit me. Oh my God, this happened last night. And I immediately turned my head to look at the window, and the Venetian blinds had the drapery stuck into them. And then I knew this was no dream.
It had happened.
This was for real. Absolutely, this had happened. So at breakfast, I asked everybody, did everybody see those lights last night? Maybe a fire engine or something? Nope, didn't see a thing. Not and I certainly wasn't going to tell anyone because I knew they wouldn't believe me. So I kept that to myself.
So you have already, at the age of 11, been a multiple experiencer, we would say. Can we move ahead to your time in the Air Force? Only because we do have a certain limit on our time. It's not ending yet, but we need to move
Yes.
ahead to that point so we can get to the very, very serious incidents of perhaps first where you saw the something over the missile base, and then the camping trip.
Yes. Yes. I can move this right along.
Sorry about that. I wish we had,
No. That makes perfect sense. I understand. The years between seeing the flying saucer when I was 11 and when I was 18, those years were absolutely normal. I had nothing out of the ordinary happened whatsoever. I joined the United States Air Force. They trained me as a medic. I got certified as an EMT paramedic, and I drove an ambulance. I was partnered with this guy. I call him in the book Tobias, and we were friends. We had a good, tight friendship, and we worked together. We were the only two guys amenable to work in the night shift from 11 p.m. at night till 8 in the morning. I did it because I was taking evening classes and on base, and that fit my schedule. And Tobias was a amateur astronomer. He liked to watch the night sky. So we're it for the night shift. Our phone rings. This is 1975. Again, it's cold. What I call the crash phone rings. The crash phone is a red phone. Anytime it rings, there's an aircraft emergency. There's something wrong. And this was at Whiteman Air Force Base. And in 1975, they had dozens of missile silos spread out over desolate area of western Missouri. And each one of these silos was a tube in the ground that held a 60-foot long Minuteman II ICBM missile. And I think I sent you a photograph. If you look at the photograph, you'll see there's a blue dome.
Mm-hmm.
That blue dome is what caps the launch tube.
I'm going to try to put these up on the website so our listeners can see the pictures. Go ahead, Terry.
Okay. And there's a trapezoid-looking little building there made out of concrete. It's an interesting, when you walk in the door, there's an elevator there with one button, down. And you take that and it will take you down to the bottom of the missile so that missile maintenance people can work on it. And we got a call that a missile technician had fallen and hurt himself and needed immediate assistance. So Toby and I hopped in our ambulance and we drove to the location I refer to as Kilo 5. We drove as fast as I could make the 8-cylinder General Motors ambulance go. And we were about a mile away, and I could see this orange glow in the horizon. And what it was there were a dozen or so security police vehicles there, and they had their overhead lights, which were red, and they were all blinking out of sync. And because it was so cold, there was this big, massive cloud of exhaust fumes illuminated by these lights. It just made for an eerie glow. And I got to the thing. We got there, and I look for who's in charge. I see this a captain, standing in the roadway, and I rolled down my window and said, "Where's our patient, sir?" And he says, "Park your vehicle, park the ambulance over there. Stay off the radio. Stay in your vehicle. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out unless I say so." I'm like, okay, I guess he's not taking questions. And Toby and I pulled over, and our inside of our windows are fogged up pretty bad because of the temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So Toby says, "I'm going to find out what's going on, man." Toby, in violation of this captain's order, hops out of the ambulance, goes out, and is gone 3 or 4 minutes, comes back. yanks my door, the passenger door open, grabs me by the arm, and starts pulling me. And he says, "Man, you have got to see this. Man, you ain't never seen nothing like this. You have got to see this." And he's pulling me, and I grab my parka, and I don't know what has him so upset. And I got out, I was throwing my parka on, and here's everybody looking up, and I look up, and over that blue dome, 50 feet or so, is a black diamond-shaped thing the size of a full-size cargo van. Now, when I first looked at it, I looked for wires or something because it just doesn't register. It doesn't make sense to see this thing just hang there in midair.
Right.
And there were no propellers, no exhaust, no anything.
And it's a four-sided diamond, and it's matte black?
Yes, it's non-reflective. It's lit up by the security police guys. They had searchlights on their cars and trucks. They had it lit up. It was a non-reflective, no markings of any kind on it. And the captain walked over to me, Eddie, and I had this smile on his face. And we looked at each other. Man, are you seeing what I'm seeing? So he kind of put rank aside for a moment. And we just felt something was going to happen. And of course, something did happen, and that is it shot off. It shot off just like the flying saucer I saw shoot off. In a millisecond, it was gone.
Right.
It had to go. Incredible speed. We picked up our patient. A guy had fallen and broken his ankle, and we made our way back to the hospital and dropped our patient off to the doctor and a nurse, restocked our ambulance, and then our commanding officer is there, and he says, "I need to see you boys." Yes, sir. And we really did. He was a really good guy. Our commanding officer was a good guy. And we went into his office, and he says, "All right, boys, what do you see? Tell me what you saw out there." And we told him. And he asked me, he says, "Did you write any of this in your report?" I said, "Of course not." He asked to see my report. I gave it to him. I thought it was odd. He took a felt tip magic marker and he redacted all of the times, except for the time of departure. I left at 02:18 hours, 2 o'clock in the morning. He left that time on, but all of the other times, like our time of arrival at the scene and all that, he redacted that out, took the original over to a copy machine, made 2 copies, kept the original and a copy, and gave me back a copy with the redaction and said, "This is what I want you to turn in." And I wasn't asking questions. "Yes, sir." And then he says, "All right, boys, do me a favor. Show me what you saw. Can you draw it?" I said, "Sure, I think we can draw it." But I'm not a real good artist. Toby was much better at this than I was. And he had the presence of mind. He actually counted the facets on the side of the thing.
Wow.
And he was a really sharp kid. And he drew a much better image of it than I could draw. And it's hard to portray this 3-dimensional object in 2 dimensions.
Sure.
And he took our drawings and looked at them for a minute, slid them in his desk drawer and said, "Boys, what you saw out there was a prototype helicopter. You can't talk about it. It's a secret. You understand? I know you're smart guys, Now don't screw this up. There's no word about it, no talking. No talking." And we, "Yes, sir." And we couldn't wait to get home to tell our wives, of course.
Of course.
And
you do know that there are 2 gentlemen, one of whom is named Robert Hastings, and the other of whom is named Robert Salas, and they both study things that have happened over other missile silos across the country.
I'm new on the UFO culture.
Okay.
But I do know the name from my reading. I'm trying to catch up. I'm trying to get up to speed. I did cross the name Robert Salas, who was a launch control officer.
Yes, and Robert Hastings had a father in the military, and he has done a movie about that and written some books. And he has been on Shattered Reality podcast. So you might want to check out his accounts. And I'm sure he would be extremely interested to hear from you. I'm friends with Bob Salas on Facebook, but Robert Hastings has in fact been on the show, and he did put out a call on the show, on our show, as well as other shows, that if there are military men out there who have had incidents with the missile silos, like they did up at Minot Air Force Base,
Yes.
and the other one that starts with an M, offhand, not in my brain. But those are the two guys to talk to about that part of the incident. So,
Robert Hastings.
and Robert Salas. I'll
Salas.
get back to you with those names after the show. But
Okay.
as we are running down on time, I want you to, and I hate doing
Jump
this.
forward.
Yeah, jump forward to the idea that you and Toby decided to go on a camping trip.
Yes.
At some
yes.
time after that.
Give me just an idea of what kind of time frame you'd like me to keep this in, and I can pace myself better.
Okay. I think we have about 15 more minutes.
Okay. Okay, that's perfect. I think I can do that
Okay.
and cover the important parts. So,
And if I just want to mention this now, we have
Yes.
here, sort of like to let people know, we have Terry Lovelace on. He's a lawyer, and he wrote Incident at Devil's Den, which is a true story of an alien abduction incidents, and also an implant. And it is available on Amazon for purchase, and it is a very, very gripping and compelling story. I read the whole thing through, and I've read parts of it more than once. So, in terms of us here on Shattered Reality, we thoroughly recommend the book. So, moving along to the incident that you had mentioned with the camping and our poor friend Tobias.
yes. 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 I just might mention that the black diamond that we saw, we in no way thought that was extraterrestrial. We were certain that was something from the Soviet Union. I mean, this was the height of the Cold War. I mean, I considered myself to be an expert on extraterrestrial things. I'd seen 2 flying saucers. This wasn't a saucer, ergo it was not from outer space. We thought it was something from the Soviets. But yeah, 2 years after this event, my buddy Toby says, I got an idea. Let's go camping. And I was from St. Louis City. He was from Flint, Michigan. And I said, Toby, we're city boys. We don't know the first thing about camping. And he says, yeah, I know, but it'd be fun. I was an amateur photographer. Everybody knew that I had a darkroom, developed my own black and white film. And I thought about the idea for a while, and it became, in a matter of 48 hours, it went from just an idea, it kind of became an obsession. And it was just all-consuming. And I said, our wives aren't going to go along with this. They don't want to go. He's like, no, man, I'm just talking about the 2 of us. Let's go down, scope it out, see if we like it. If we like it, next time we'll bring my kids, and you and your wife come, and we'll go down and have some fun. I hear it's a good time. So we know nothing about the outdoors, but we packed all the things we thought were necessary, including industrial or military strength DEET, sunburn lotion, and the like. And we left at dawn on an early morning and drove. Now, keep in mind, there are a dozen state parks, beautiful state parks around Whiteman Air Force Base. And I said, Toby, why do we got to drive all the way down the other side of the Arkansas border? And he's like, man, this is the place. He says, this has everything that you need. If you want to photograph eagles, this is the place to go. And he sold me on the idea. So we drove down, and we decided, we talked about staying in a campground. And Toby's like, what's the fun in that? We're outdoorsmen. If you stay in the campground, it's like staying in a parking lot in the forest. He said, we want to get away from people. We want to be out in the wilderness. So we drove into the park and intentionally dodged the state or the park rangers, and picked up a little map that showed us some ways throughout the park, but then ended. And we took a road, and Toby said, "Take this way." And he seemed like Toby seemed like he knew where he was going. I swear, to this day, I believe that. And he kept a banknote or a banking envelope that was in my glove box, that and a pencil, and he made a map of our route because there were so many twists and turns, and the scenery was all the same. We wanted to make sure we could get out of there.
Sure.
So we found we drove, and the road took an upward turn, and we climbed higher and higher, and we got to the crest of this plateau, and there was this open, I called it a meadow, in front of us that was just beautiful. And Toby was right. It would be a great place to photograph eagles. Well, a lot happened, but to get to the camping, we hurriedly set up camp. And we're sitting around the campfire, and Toby says, "Hey, man, what are those? Were those there before?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I look over his shoulder, and there are three perfect little stars. I shouldn't say little. They were about as bright as the North Star, and they were in a perfect triangular figuration sitting on the horizon. And I said, "Toby, what are those? You're the guy. You're the amateur astronomer. What are those?" He's like, "Man, I don't know everything in the sky. Those." And we discussed, could that be an aircraft? Could it be, and we're dismissive of that idea. And then suddenly things starts to move.
Uh-oh.
And it rotates as if on an axis about 2/3 of the way around, and then starts to go up in the air. And about the time this happened, I noticed that the crickets and the tree frogs and all the noise of the forest had stopped. It was dead silent. And while we're watching this thing, I said, "Toby, is this right? I don't hear the crickets or the frogs anymore." And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it. We've been laughing and joking. They'll be back, but don't worry about it. This strange apathy took over. It's hard to describe, but we were only slightly interested in watching this thing. Now, we watched it ascend up into the sky, and it was pretty clear that this was one object and not three unconnected objects moving in unison. And Toby noticed at first, when it moved past the star would blink out until it passed, and it would blink back on. And it started to move faster. And as it moved faster, it grew, and it grew exponentially. And these 3 points of light expanded. And this thing is eventually eating up entire fields of stars.
Oh, my Lord.
And I asked Toby, I said, "Should we be scared?" And he's like, "No, man, I'm not scared. Are you scared?" And I remember saying, "No, I'm not scared." And the thing parks directly over our head and comes to a halt. And it takes up almost 1/3 of the night sky. And it is like somebody took a pair of scissors and cut out this massive triangle over our heads. Because inside of those 3 points was jet black. And the rest of the sky was a deep, deep blue. And we're looking at that, and Toby picks up a flashlight, and we're both reclined. We're laying there. Toby picks up a flashlight and says, "I wonder what will happen if I signal it." And I tried to snatch it out of his hands, but I wasn't quick enough. And he holds his arm up over his head, and he flicks this flashlight on 3 times. And when he did, this beam of light from the dead center of this thing came down. I mean, it just like turned on, like somebody flipped a switch, and boom, it's there. It was about the diameter of a softball, and it was light that was visible, like a searchlight through a fog.
A column of light.
Yes, yeah, a beam of visible light. And we watched it, and I don't think a word was said between us. It was there for about a minute, and it had gone. It just blinks out. And in its stead comes this laser. Lasers were a new concept in 1977. I'd never seen a laser. And there's this pencil, diameter of a pencil, beam of purplish blue light that shot down and is just darting and dancing all over the campground. And it would, be here 1 second, flip off for a millisecond, and then be here 1 second. And I know it struck me several times, and I know it struck Toby several times, and it was just darted all over our campsite. And I think to this day, it was scanning us. It was looking for us. And that beam turned off. And as soon as the beam turned off, Toby said, "Well, show's over." And I don't even remember if I answered him. And we both got up and dragged our air mattresses into the tent with this thing the size of 3 city blocks hanging over our heads. It makes no sense. But that's what we did. And we were absolutely apathetic about the whole thing. I remember thinking, I laid my head on the pillow. I remember thinking Toby was wrong. The crickets and the tree frogs, they never did come back. And I closed my eyes and I woke up and there were these brilliant lights flashing orange and yellow and white. And it was a replay of the light show that I saw when I was 11. And it illuminated the tent. And I got to my knees and I'm in a fog from sleep and I don't have my wits about me. And I'm thinking, park rangers? Are there park rangers with flashlights out there? And we could hear rustling like of people walking around the campsite. And Toby's crouched down and he's peering outside. And between these flashes of light, I could see tracks of tears down his right cheek. I'm thinking, my God, what could make this grown man cry? And there was a drone. There was that mechanical drone again. And I thought maybe a generator on the back of a truck or something. And I got to my knees and I was in pain. I noticed immediately how badly I hurt. And I nudged Toby and I pulled back the flap of the tent to look out. And here is this UFO the size of a 5-story office building. It is incredibly big. I think I drew an image. I believe you may have that. And if you look at the bottom lower left, you'll see a car and some figures drawn.
Uh-huh.
And I did that to try to bring the thing to scale. I just can't convey how absolutely immense this thing was. And that interest, that apathy that we had some hours earlier, that was gone. Oh, that was long gone. Now it was terror. We were absolutely terrified.
Yes.
I'm looking out and I notice there are groups of little kids, and maybe a dozen or so, and maybe 15. They're walking around in the meadow in groups of 2 or 3, and there's a column of light from the center of the thing. This UFO didn't park on the ground. It parked about 25, 30 feet off the floor of the meadow.
Yes.
And from the center of it descended a beam of light, again, visible, like a searchlight through fog. And these little beings would walk into it and they just disintegrate, they disappear.
And they weren't children, I'll bet.
That's what I said, Toby, what are these little kids doing out here? And he said, man, those ain't no little kids. And then it hit me. And then I had flashes. I had flashes of being abducted and being hurt. And we were too terrified to move. I mean, we stayed in the tent. We watched this thing until all these little figures had disintegrated and gone back up, and then the light clicked off and the humming sound stopped. And there were 3 bars, well, I can only see 2. On each point of the triangle, there was a light bar that went through all 5 stories. And I remember seeing this white light kind of drift up, intense white light, go up and up and up. And then I thought, I bet that's what makes it twinkle in the sky and look like a star. That's an odd observation to make, but I made it. And we rolled over on our backs, and we watched this thing, again, lift off like a hot air balloon. It didn't shoot off; it just lifted off like a hot air balloon and ascended into the sky. And we watched it as it got higher and higher, and it disappeared. And everything is still quiet. No tree frogs, no crickets. It's dead quiet. And we're both terrified. We sat there for what must have been 30 minutes. And Toby says, man, we got to get out of here. And I was terrified at the idea of being out of the tent. I did not want to leave. I felt like I was safe inside the tent. I think I felt like to be out in the open, I would be vulnerable. And that fear has stuck with me. I don't like to be out in an open field. I don't like to be any place out in a wide open area.
It's called agoraphobia. Is that fear? Agoraphobia, a fear of the open spaces.
That's why I have that still. We made a decision that we would run for the car, and that's what we did. We went to the car, hopped in, and got out of there and drove back to base as fast as we could. And we left everything there. We left a tent. We left hospital blankets and all of our gear.
The equipment, I'm assuming, cost you some amount of money. And being in the military, you guys weren't millionaires or anything. So that was, you did leave some of your investment there. And so that attests to your fear level upon leaving.
It was terror. It was. I don't know how to describe it. And to drive with just your high beams on through this road that's not much more than ruts. The high beams would bounce up in the trees sometimes, and it'd be on the ground in front of us. I could barely see. Toby would have to reach over and turn on the dome light to look at his little map to figure out which way to go, and then I'd be blind. But we managed to get out of there, and we hit Blacktop Road and headed back to base. And there were just a couple things that were important to us. I wanted to get as much distance between me and the Devil's Den as I could possibly manage, as fast as I could manage it. Number two was thirst. We were incredibly thirsty. I had never, ever in my life been so thirsty. I asked Toby, root around in the back seat, see if you can, I'll drink anything as long as it's not poison. And, you would think, we'll pull over to 7-Eleven or someplace and get something to drink. Well, this is the backwoods of Missouri in 1977 in the Ozarks. There was no place. So we drove until we could get someplace. We found a little gas station, and that's when I found out how badly I was burned. Both of us were burned. I had sunburn on the soles of my feet. I had sunburn under my arms. It made no sense. I would have had to been nude on a rotisserie to have been burned the way I was burned. And the thirst was just unbelievable. We got home. Our wives, of course, took us both to the hospital immediately. And the hospital separated us. And it was also odd because they gave us private rooms.
Military hospital we're talking about here. Military hospital?
Military hospital.
Okay.
And enlisted guys normally didn't get a private room. Normally we would stay on the ward, an open ward. So I thought, this is great, private room, cool. And I was incredibly photophobic. So they allowed the lights to stay turned off, and they were pumping fluids into us. And I was feeling better. It's about 24, 36 hours later, and my nurse comes in. She's got my pain meds. She's got an injection in her hand, or a hypodermic needle in her hand, and two guys in suits follow her in. And they're dressed in blue civilian suits, and they show me their badges. They say we're special agents from the Office of Special Investigation. I'm Special Agent Gregory. This is Captain so-and-so. The guy in charge, Gregory, did all the talking.
And this was AFOSI, right? AFOSI?
This was, I'm sorry?
AFOSI. Air Force
Air Force Office of
Special
yes,
Intelligence.
Yes.
Okay.
They were to the Air Force what NCIS is to the Navy, kind of.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And they pulled up a chair next to each side of us, and this major reached over and flipped on the lights. And I said, "Sir, my eyes, I feel like I have sand in my eyes. Could we turn those off, please?" And I remember "I got to see what I'm doing, son. You don't want me to work in the dark now here, do you? We got to see what we're doing, son." And the captain it was a hand crank bed. He cranks up the head of my bed and slides everything off of the the tray table that was in front of me, and slides it so it's under my chest. And making a very long story short, lays out 6 forms for me to sign. And I couldn't read them. And I said, "Sir, what are these?" And he says, "These are waivers and consents. These give us certain rights. They give us rights to look to see if you have any contraband. Do you have anything that you're hiding from us?" And I'm like, "No, sir." And he says, "Well, this will give us your consent. Do you want to not deny us consent? Is that what you're saying? Or do you want to cooperate with us?" I'm like, "Oh, no, sir, I want to cooperate. I'm 22. I'm dumb. I didn't have the benefit of a law degree." I signed everything in front of me. He swooped them up, put them in his little briefcase, and he said, "Now, what made you boys leave your campsite and leave all your gear there? The park rangers found it, and that's how they tracked you down. We tracked you down. Why would you leave your campsite and leave everything there? Did you plan on coming back? Did you have a little marijuana plant somewhere out there, a little plot of marijuana you're growing out in the forest?" And I thought, "Oh my God, maybe they found somebody's plot of marijuana and could hang it on us."
Oh.
So I'm terrified. And he says, "So tell me, tell us what you did out there." And I told him, and I did not tell him about the UFO. I just didn't do it. The thought of even doing it never crossed my mind. And I answered his questions as best that I could. And he was just absolutely all about intimidation. And at the end, his affect changes to look kind of almost like a normal human being. And he leans down next to my ear and says, "You two knuckleheads stumbled onto something out there, didn't you?" And I didn't answer him. And he says, "You know what it is. And I know what it is. And I think you took pictures of it. And I want your pictures." He says, "That's all I need. Give me the film from your camera. That's all I'm asking you for." And I said, "Sir, I never took a single picture." And he said, "I don't believe you." And turned the lights out and he left. Toby and I were ordered to have no contact with one another. But I need to move past that to get to the interrogation, because that's important.
I just want to add something in there, because unfortunately, because our time is running out a little bit, you had planned to take pictures, you bought all kinds of film, but at the very last moment, you forgot that and a number of other things you forgot at home, and it sort of seemed as though it was somehow you were programmed to forget it, for lack of a better word.
I'm glad you said that, because that's absolutely true. I mean, we were known as the nerds of the squadron, if that makes sense. And we did things methodically. We laid out with pencil and paper everything we needed. I had a camp lantern, a hatchet. I bought special film for my camera, and I left it at home. I left the camera sitting on the kitchen table, and the camp lantern and oil or the fuel and the hatchet, I left that in the garage. And Toby who was in charge of bringing 2 6-packs of beer, a dozen hot dogs, etc., left everything in his refrigerator. And it struck me, and I don't understand that we're just not that inept. We are not that inept. But this whole thing was just a bumbling. And I do think too that Toby knew where to go. He may not know that he knew where to go, but he knew where to go.
And basically, after this happened, except for like sort of one last goodbye, you never saw Toby again because he was relocated, correct?
Yes. Well, there are a couple of things. As soon as that car hit pavement and we were headed back to the base, I looked over and Toby, I think Toby was hurt a lot worse than I was. And he was kind of curled into a fetal position on the big bench seat of this old Chevy. And I felt this sudden dislike for the man. And I actually shook my head. And I'm thinking, what is this? And I thought, this is all his fault. He brought you down here. This man's not your friend. And this man absolutely was my best friend. But I wanted nothing to do with him. I didn't even want to see him. It's the strangest thing. I wanted nothing to do with him. And before he left, I violated the no contact order. I didn't want anything to do with the guy, but I did want to say I felt the need to say goodbye to him. So I went to his house, and they were packing. They were getting ready to be shipped out. And now Toby was the kind of guy that when we barbecued every other weekend or so, he might have 2 beers. He wasn't a drinker. And I walk in 10 a.m., he turns the corner, and he looks like a train wreck. And this poor guy, his eyes are bloodshot, and he reeks of vodka. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. And I see him, and I feel stunned. And I look down at my shoes, and I should have embraced this man. I should have shaken his hand, but I didn't. I just froze. And I managed to say, Toby, I just wanted to say goodbye and wish you well. And he looked up at me and he said, it happened, didn't it, Terry? They hurt us. They hurt me and they hurt you too. And I said, yeah, Toby, it all happened and you're not going crazy. And I turned around and I ran out of the house, got in the car and went home. And that's the last time I saw Tobias. Wow. So the Office of Special Investigation, about 6 weeks into this thing, I'm worried that I'm under investigation. So I call Special Agent Gregory. He left a business card on my tray table. And I said, sir, I have an idea. Why don't I take a lie detector test for you? I can prove I don't have any film. I don't have any marijuana plot. I'm not deceiving you. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, yeah, you are deceiving this man because you're not telling him about the UFO. But, I just wanted this thing over with. It was hanging over my head. And he said, do you have any film for me yet? And I said, no, sir. And he says, well, we got nothing to talk about. He said, I guess you want to change your blue uniform for one that's black and white with stripes. Is that what you want? Meaning a prison uniform,
yes.
Of course. And he said, I got my own lie detector. And he slammed the phone down. 6 weeks afterward, I'm busy I'm assigned over to a supply section. And my CO calls me and says, they want to see you down at OSI headquarters. There'll be a car here for you shortly. I suggest you don't keep them waiting. And oh my God. And I thought, here it comes. I'm either going to be arrested. I stopped to use the restroom. And that's so important that I did. And I'll explain why. And checked my appearance and tried to look as good as I could. And I ran to the front steps, and sure enough, there's the blue squad car waiting for me. And the driver took me to OSI headquarters and parked the car and followed me. And I followed him in, went through the double locked doors that buzz to get you in and get you out. We went down a long hallway and it had little interrogation rooms on either side, and they were A, B, C, D designated. And I think we were in room D. And he opened the door with a key and said, "Someone will be with you shortly." And the door shut, and I knew it was locked. I didn't even try it. I knew it was locked. Now, this is about 9 a.m. or so. And there's nothing in the room but a desk, a comfortable desk chair, and 3 aluminum chairs, those fiberglass chairs like from the 60s. A mirror, which I sized up, had to be a 2-way mirror, because who's going to be grooming themselves in this interrogation room? And a clock. Oh, and there's a little 5x7 window, 5 inches by 7-inch window. And I sat there for 3 hours, and not a soul passed that window or came by. And finally, the 2 agents that I saw, Gregory and the captain, they come strolling in. They're smiling and laughing. And they came in, and they didn't say a word to me, except to make me surrender the chair that was comfortable. And they put me in one of the little fiberglass chairs. And Gregory was kind of upbeat. He says, "Well, Sergeant Lovelace, I think we're going to put an end to this today for you. Would you like that?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'd like that very much." And he said, "You know, you're going to be hypnotized today, and we're going to give you some medication that'll make it easier for you. Do you understand that?" And I said, "No, sir, I don't understand it. I don't know why." And he cut me off at the why in my sentence and had a piece of paper in his hand, and he slammed it down on the table in front of me and said, "This is all the why I need, son." And I signed a consent. And
This was the consent that you had signed several months before.
so, yes, several months before. Yes.
Okay.
When I was in the hospital, when I couldn't see, when I couldn't read.
Right.
And just then, after we're doing this, a major knocks on the door, and the captain lets him in. This major comes in. He's wearing oak leaves, but no name tag. And his demeanor, it's odd. He carried himself like a priest or a therapist, but not like a military officer. And he talked to the special agents for a couple seconds. Like, "Hey, how you guys doing?" You know, he talked about golf for a minute or two. And then he turned his attention to me and says, "Well, Sergeant Lovelace, I finally get to meet you. How are you?" And he shook my hand like he was an old friend. And he said, "You know you're going to be hypnotized today." And I said, "Yes, sir, I don't understand why." And he said, "Now, you're not thinking about withdrawing your consent. Is that what you're telling me?" I said, "No, sir, no, sir. I want to get this done, sir. I want to get this behind me. I want to move on with my life." And then he changed, and his demeanor turned on a dime, and he said, "Well, my name is Major Brownfield, but for today's exercise, would you just call me Brad? That is my name." And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Don't you mean yes, Brad?" And I said, yes, Brad." And he said, "For purposes of this little exercise today, may I call you Terry? It is your name." And I said, "Yes, Brad." And he said, "Well, I understand you're from St. Louis." He started talking small chit chat about St. Louis and named off some landmarks and engaged me in conversation. And I'm thinking, my life just isn't this interesting. And he must have picked up on that, because he stopped and kind of got down to business and said, he just reached over and took my right arm and laid it down on the table, and he's humming all the while and rolls up my sleeve. He carried under his arm a little what looked like a shaving kit. It was leather and a little larger than an average shaving kit. And in it was a little white towel, a hypodermic needle with some yellow fluid in it, a piece of rubber tubing to use as a tourniquet, some bandages, some alcohol swabs, and a stethoscope, and a blood pressure cuff. And he laid all these things out meticulously, and he's humming the whole while. And he puts the tourniquet on, and he says, "Now, you're going to feel a little pinch here, and then you're going to feel sedated." And he says, "It's okay. It'll just help you remember." And he said, don't fight it, just go along with it. And he says, you know, it'll make you feel like you've had a few beers. And he winks at me and says, you look like a guy that likes to have a few beers on a weekend. And I thought, you SOB, not all enlisted men drink, don't characterize me like that. But he had a voice. He had a voice that was smooth, like a radio announcer. And he said, all right, he gave me the medication, and then he says, we're going to go down a flight of stairs. And in my mind's eye, I had had some psych classes under my belt, and I knew a little bit about hypnosis, and I knew that it could be resisted. The medication worried me, but I knew that I could resist being hypnotized, and I did my best to play along with it. But what I did was he had me go, okay, Terry, I want you to take that first step down the stairwell. Take that first step and feel relaxed. Taking that next step, feeling twice as relaxed, feeling comfortable, feeling warm, feeling safe. Taking that third step, Terry, feeling relaxed. And just as he's doing this, I'm drowning him out in my mind, and I'm trying to go backward on a number line. As he's going down, I'm counting upward. And I'm doing everything I can to not surrender all of my mind to him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. It sounds a lot like some U-2 pilot sort of downed in the Soviet Union during the Cold War, getting captured and trying not to be hypnotized by the Soviet military. That's what it sounds like to me, mostly from having read the book and your account now.
Oh, Gary Powers, I know the name of the guy, yeah.
Yeah,
I
something
don't
of
know
that
he
nature.
went through that.
Well, I don't know if it was him that went through it, but I know that was the drill when the Soviets would get one of our guys.
Well, I made the decision that I would try to bifurcate my mind. I would try to divide it into compartments. And he could have a little compartment here, and then I would have this compartment over here where I ran through Beatle music. I went through the tunes. I went through the lyrics of Rolling Stones songs. I did everything I could to keep my mind as occupied as possible and just enough to answer his questions. And what happened was that medication, I resisted, but that medication took effect. And I have some blank spots there that I can't account for. But I recall the captain saying, I'm amazed every time I see this process, like in a whisper. And I think, my God, how many people do they do this to? And then Major Gregory says, is he under? He's like, oh, yeah, he was under by the count of 3. And I thought, oh, you're arrogant. Uh-huh. So then the questions began, and he asked me questions, and he says, now, Terry, and his voice, he had a voice you wanted to listen to. You wanted to. He said, Terry, I want you to tell me what you saw. We're going to look around, and you're going to tell me what you saw, not what you think. I want you to tell me what you saw. And it was crazy because in my mind's eye, it all came back to me. And I think what he did was, I think he dragged this up. I think he dragged this out of my subconscious and into my conscious memory, because I said things I couldn't believe that were coming out of my mouth. And I had images and flashes of things that they did to us.
On the craft.
I had no clue.
On the craft. Things they did to you on the craft, Terry. Is that the case?
Things they did to me on the craft, the inside of the craft. I described the inside, and the inside of the craft was amazing. And I could see it in my mind's eye, like watching a motion picture almost. And it was just enormous. It was like a giant warehouse. It looked larger inside than it looked outside. And I remembered that in a corner were 3 flying saucers. There were 3 discs parked in a row, parked in a line. There was a moving sidewalk. There were people milling around. There were the gray people, the little gray guys, which, by the way, I don't think those are living beings. I think those are robots. I really do. And then there were the tall typical alien-looking guys, and they were walking about. And I remembered that as we're walking along, one of the alien guys caught my eye, and I just shivered. When he looked at you, it was like I felt like naked. I felt like he knew me. He felt like he could see inside my head. I saw a group of 50 or 60 people that were inside that thing.
Humans, people,
I have no
not
idea.
aliens, humans, right? I just want to be clear.
Yeah, human beings. And it was a mixed bag of men, women, and children. And they're all standing around. Some are nude, holding their clothes, and some are dressed. And I thought, my God, where did these people come from? And that haunts me to this day. And I wonder, what? We were lucky to get away. But what happened to those poor souls? I don't know. And
Wow.
I described all these things to Brad, and I told him that this being, this hybrid being, who I'd had an encounter with later, who I refer to as Betty, was walking with me, and we walked past, there were aquariums, what looked like aquariums on the side of the wall, filled with pink fluid. And everything else was white, and the inside was brilliantly lit. And inside of this tank, there was one of these fetus-like looking things, and it twitched. And I screamed. I must have screamed and I must have passed out, because the next thing I recall, he was taking my blood pressure and saying, he was holding my hand. And actually, it felt good to hold his hand, because I was terrified. I was so scared. And he said, Terry, you're in a warm, safe place. Nobody's going to hurt you. Everything is okay. Everything is just fine. You're just seeing things that are in the past. They can't hurt you now. Now tell me what you saw. And he pressed me, and I didn't want to be pressed. I wanted to stop.
Sure.
But he pressed me, and I told him, oh my God, I told him that I could hear Toby screaming. I could hear Toby screaming, and I remember thinking, why are these guys, why do they hurt us? Why are they hurting us? And the whole thing, of course, then had that ring of familiarity, like, I know that's the only way I know to describe it, a feeling of familiarity.
Because it had happened before, perhaps when you were a child. It was a familiar scenario to you.
Yes. And I recall that I was undressed at one point, and I was on a table, and I was immobile. And they were doing medical-like procedures on me, and they took sperm from me. And I recall they had a machine. The thing kind of looked like an oxygen mask that they placed over my genitals. Kind of embarrassing, but. And I told Brad, I said, they put it over you, and then it's like, bam, and you have no control over it. And I told Brad about the woman and I going to the moon in what I called the big ship. And this woman and I were in a ship, and I think this occurred during an abduction when I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were looking out these gigantic windows and seeing these billions of stars, but there was no sensation of movement. I felt like I assumed we were in a building. And suddenly the moon comes from right to left and just rolls over. And I'm like, oh my God, this thing's going to hit us. And telepathically, she assured me everything is okay. Everything is all right. And I remember asking her how we communicate telepathically. And I was wondering, how big is this thing? And she told me in kilometers. And I remembered it. And it was like 575 kilometers by 75 kilometers tall. And she said that they can never fly in front of the moon, between the moon and the earth. And I thought, why? She says, because this is so large, people will see a dot moving across the moon. So they can never do that. And she said, our home is on the other side. And I recall seeing the dark side of the moon. And it was all dark for a little bit. And it was dark as, 2 a.m. anywhere on Earth. And then I looked down through this big window and I could see all these lights. And it was a city.
On the dark
And it
side
was a
of the
big
moon.
city. But it was curious because, it was like flying into LAX, except there were no streets. Cities are laid out in a pattern, and there was no pattern to this. It was just random buildings here and there. And that's what I recalled.
Wow.
And
Terry?
Yes.
I'm going to have to do a little bit of cutting to the chase because our program is really over, but we're going to have to wrap it up in a few minutes. So
I understand.
I really have to appreciate you telling this very interesting and amazing and heartfelt story here of your abduction. And if I just can sort of paraphrase things and cut towards the end of it, you kind of put this aside for a number of years until you had more recently in 2012 the implant was discovered, and then at some juncture during the night, the implant was removed after you were told that it would be removed by
Yes.
the hybrid woman, Betty.
They did. They came and took it.
And they took it, except for the two little wires, which remain to this day. But
Yes.
the really astounding thing which had happened in the interim, you finished your law degree. You became the Assistant Attorney General of American Samoa, if I got that correctly. And
Yes.
then, and you...
And Vermont.
And Vermont. Oh, boy, you had quite an illustrious career. And then... after this was removed, you went from a high end of 240 pounds to your current weight of 150 pounds. And you've been a little bit, I won't say sick, but you've been wasting. You've had some wasting away, and you're still a reasonably young man. You're only 63 years old, if I'm correct.
Yes.
And so in a matter of several months, you lost a whole lot of weight, and now you're in the process of trying to keep that weight on. Have I summarized things correctly?
You are. The weight loss actually came when I made the determination to write this book and to tell everything, because the nightmares returned. It was like when they found these things in my leg, it was a catalyst that just brought it all out. And my poor wife, she went through waking up with me screaming again in the middle of the night. But you know what she did? She's a smart woman. I love her to death. We've been together 40 some years, and 44 years. But she, during the worst of the nightmares, she suggested that I journal them. And she got me a spiral ring notebook and a pen, and she said, write this stuff down. When you wake up and you've had this nightmare, write it down. And I did.
And thus we have this wonderful book, which I'm going to mention again, Incident at Devil's Den, A True Story by Terry Lovelace, Esquire, and it can be gotten on Amazon. Terry, I'm going to ask our listeners to write in their comments. I would like them to tell us what they think about your story. I am very moved by it. I have a number of questions, and I hope that you will agree to come back on again.
I would love to come back on again. And I'd love to answer every one of their questions.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you so very much. And I feel terrible, but we are on a time schedule that the studio is going to be filled with some other people very shortly. If we don't leave, they'll be here playing rock and roll. So
okay. I understand.
So thank you so very much, Terry Lovelace, Incident at Devil's Den. Thanks for being with us, and you will be hearing from me, Terry. Thank you again.
My great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye now. Well, Shattered Reality listeners, that was Terry Lovelace, and I must say, this was a very moving, very unusual, very heartfelt story, and I would love to hear what you have to say about it. We will be back again shortly with a new podcast. And please remember to like us on Facebook, to go to both of our websites, Shattered Reality Podcast.wordpress.com and shatteredrealitypodcast.com. We are also on iTunes, and many of our episodes are on YouTube, and we're putting more up every week. So please feel free to contact us with any of your experiences of the paranormal, whether they be UFOs or other things. And hopefully by our next podcast, Kate Valentine will be able to join us for the entire show. We're going to be working on the technical aspects of that, so she'll be back for us. And so now, goodbye from Shattered Reality.